around the country. C-SPAN is brought to you by your cable or satellite provider.
Next, the CBS News Report on Senator Robert F. Kennedy's announcement challenging sitting President Lyndon B. Johnson for the 1968 Democratic presidential nomination. The announcement and press conference is followed by a CBS interview with Minnesota Democratic Senator Eugene McCarthy, who is also running for president.
The program originally scheduled at this time will not be seen in order that we may bring you the following special broadcast. The news conference of Senator Robert F. Kennedy, live from Washington. First from New York, CBS News correspondent Roger Mudd.
Good morning. We are broadcasting this morning the announcement of Democratic Senator Robert F. Kennedy of New York that he will be a candidate for the presidency. You can't find but 1 in 1,000 who believes he will not make that announcement. The senator is doing so in the face of almost solid opposition from the Democratic Party professionals and the state chairman of the Democratic Party in this country. Only 3 state chairmen, New York, Oregon, and Tennessee, have come out in favor of Mr. Kennedy's candidacy. He's also making the announcement in the opposition of thousands of young Democrats who claim that Kennedy has become an opportunist trying to cash in on the courage of Eugene McCarthy, who was the successful candidate in the New Hampshire primary, at least successful in terms of indicating the great feeling that exists in the country against Lyndon Johnson. The senator will be entering, along with some members of his family, the Senate's ornate caucus room on Capitol Hill, already crowded with as many reporters as there are in Washington, which appears to be now over 300 or 400. This is the scene of John Kennedy's presidential announcement on January 12, 1960. It was the scene of Stuart Symington's announcement 8 years ago, and it was the scene of Senator McCarthy's announcement last November. This caucus room is also where Robert Kennedy worked as the young chief counsel on the McClellan Labor Rackets Committee, which held its famous televised hearings in this room back in 1954 through 57. Senator McCarthy himself will be watching this Kennedy press conference, but the Minnesota senator will be watching it from the studios of CBS affiliate WBAY-TV in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Mrs. Kennedy, Mrs. Robert Kennedy, is now in the caucus room. Everybody on tiptoes. The still photographers with their cameras stretched overhead trying to get a picture of the Kennedy entourage as it makes its way into this formal room, which really looks like a gilded German nightclub. High ceilings and gold-covered eagles and indirect lighting, heavy columns. This is the scene outside the caucus room.
Here we go.
And I've heard someone yell, "Here we go," which means the procession started. Frank Mankiewicz with the pipe in his mouth directly ahead of Senator Robert Kennedy. Applause not coming from reporters, but from supporters of the senator. Senator Kennedy, after his announcement here, immediately comes to New York to take part in the St. Patrick's Day Parade. Down in front, they're yelling.
I am announcing today my candidacy for the presidency of the United States. I do not run for the presidency merely to oppose any man, but to propose new policies. I run because I am convinced that this country is on a perilous course, and because I have such strong feelings about what must be done, and I feel that I'm obliged to do all that I can. I run to seek new policies to end the bloodshed in Vietnam and in our cities. Policies to close the gaps that now exist between black and white, between rich and poor, between young and old, in this country and around the rest of the world. I run for the presidency because I want the Democratic Party and the United States of America to stand for hope instead of despair, for reconciliation of men instead of the growing risk of world war. I run because it is now unmistakably clear that we can change these disastrous, divisive policies only by changing the men who are now making them. But the reality of recent events in Vietnam has been glossed over with illusions. The report of the Riot Commission has been largely ignored. The crisis in gold, the crisis in our cities, the crisis in our farms and in our ghettos have all been met with too little and too late. No one who knows what I know about the extraordinary demands of the presidency can be certain that any mortal can adequately fill that position. But my service on the National Security Council during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Berlin Crisis of 1961 and 1962 and later, the negotiations on Laos and on the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty have taught me something about both the uses and the limitations of military power, about the value of negotiations with allies and with enemies, about the opportunities and the dangers which await our nation in many corners of the globe in which I have traveled. As a member of the Cabinet and a member of the Senate, I have seen the inexcusable and ugly deprivation which causes children to starve in Mississippi, black citizens to riot in Watts, young Indians to commit suicide on their reservations because they've lacked all hope and they feel they have no future, and proud and able-bodied families to wait out their lives in empty idleness in eastern Kentucky. I have traveled and I have listened to the young people of our nation and felt their anger about the war that they are sent to fight and about the world that they are about to inherit. In private talks and in public, I have tried in vain to alter our course in Vietnam before it further saps our spirit and our manpower, further raises the risks of wider war, and further destroys the country and the people it was meant to save. I cannot stand aside from the contest that will decide our nation's future and our children's future. The remarkable New Hampshire campaign of Senator Eugene McCarthy has proven how deep are the present divisions within our party and within our country. Until that was publicly clear, my presence in the race would have been seen as a clash of personalities rather than issues. But now that that fight is won, and over policies which I have long been challenging, I must enter that race. The fight is just beginning, and I believe that I can win. I have previously communicated this decision to President Johnson, and late last night my brother Senator Edward Kennedy traveled to Wisconsin to communicate my decision to Senator McCarthy. I make clear through my brother to Senator McCarthy that my candidacy would not be in opposition to his, but in harmony. My aim is to both support and expand his valiant campaign in the spirit of his November 30th statement. Taking 1 month at a time, it is important now that he achieves the largest possible majorities next month in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, and in the Massachusetts primaries. I strongly support his effort in those states, and I urge all my friends to give him their help and their votes Both of us will be encouraging like-minded delegates to the National Convention. But both of us want, above all else, an open Democratic convention in Chicago, free to choose a new course for our party and for our country. To make certain that this effort will still be effective in June, I am required now to permit the entry of my name into the California primary to be held in that month. And I do so in the belief, which I will strive to implement, that Senator McCarthy's forces and mine will be able to work together in one form or another. My desire is not to divide the strength of those forces seeking a change, but rather to increase it. Under the laws of Oregon and Nebraska, this decision requires the Secretary of State in each of these states to place my name on the ballot. But in no state will my effort be directed against Senator McCarthy. Both of us are campaigning to give our forces and our party an opportunity to select the strongest possible standard-bearer for the November election, to ensure that my candidacy must be tested beginning now, 5 months before the convention, and not after the primaries are over. I think that is the least that I can do to meet my responsibilities to the Democratic Party and to the people of the United States. Finally, my decision reflects no personal animosity or disrespect toward President Johnson. He served President Kennedy with the utmost loyalty, and it was extremely kind to me and members of my family in the difficult months which followed the events of November of 1963. I have often commended his efforts in health, in education, and in many other areas, and I have the deepest sympathy for the burden that he carries today. But the issue is not personal. It is our profound differences over where we are heading and what we want to accomplish. I do not lightly dismiss the dangers and the difficulties of challenging an incumbent president. But these are not ordinary times, and this is not an ordinary election. At stake is not simply the leadership of our party and even our country. It is our right to the moral leadership of this planet. I thank you. I appreciate members of my family and my office showing up.
Senator Kennedy, one of the first questions, you say that you are, in effect, uniting with Senator McCarthy in creating this new force. At the Budapest conference, Gus Hall, head of the Communist Party, said he welcomed McCarthy's campaign to set up this new anti-war movement. Are you going to accept his endorsement, too?
No, and I don't believe Senator McCarthy did. I think that issue and that question regarding the patriotism of Senator McCarthy or anyone else who happens to have a different point of view about the course that we're following in Vietnam was decided in New Hampshire, and I hope that it will never be brought up again.
I'm not raising a question of patriotism. I'm raising a question that Gus Hall, at the head of when 66 communist nations...
If you want an answer at the question whether I'm accepting the endorsement of Gus Hall, I am not, and I believe I can speak for Senator McCarthy that he is not either.
Senator Kennedy,
have been speculation, Senator, that this is opportunism on your part. That McCarthy had the courage to go into New Hampshire while you hesitated. Now that you're after his glory, would you address yourself to...
Well, first, as I said, I don't believe that I could...
And hear the question.
You mean I have to repeat that? A lot of nasty things involved. The question was whether the charge has been raised about the question of whether this is opportunistic of my coming into the contest at this time after Senator McCarthy had gone into the New Hampshire primary. As I said, I've spoken on these issues and these questions for a number of years and how I feel about them. I felt, and I think it was generally accepted, that if I had gone into the primary in New Hampshire, if I had won the primary in New Hampshire, or if I had done well in the primary in New Hampshire, it would have been felt at that time that this was a personal struggle. It would have been written in the press that this was a personal struggle. Every time I have spoken on Vietnam over the period of the past several years, every time I have spoken on what I think needs to be done as far as the cities are concerned, it's been put in the context of a personal struggle between myself and President Johnson. Therefore, we would get away from what the issues are which divide this country. I think the New Hampshire primary established that the division that exists in this country, the division that exists in the Democratic Party are there, that I haven't brought that about. That what has brought that about is what President Johnson, the policies that are being followed by President Johnson. Now, as far as what is happening at the moment, I can't believe that anybody thinks that this is a pleasant struggle from now on, or that I'm asking for a free ride. I've got 5 months ahead of me as far as the convention is concerned. I'm going to go into primaries. I'm going to present my case to the American people. I'm going to go all across this country. Now, if you look at the history of the United States, just in the last few years or down through our history, many people, many of those who have been candidates have gone into no primaries whatsoever. A number have gone into some primaries and then dropped out, as we saw with Governor Romney just recently. Others have felt that they shouldn't go into primaries and have come in at the time of the convention. I believe in that system of going in and having oneself tested before the American people. I'm willing to do that. And I'm going around this country and I'm going into the primary states, and then the people will be able to judge. I'm not asking for a free ride. I'm putting my candidacy and what I believe that I can do for the future of this country and what needs to be done in this country to the American people.
If Senator McCarthy had gotten 5% of the vote in New Hampshire, would you be here today?
He didn't get 5% of the vote.
But the question is, Senator...
I just don't, that's a hypothetical question. As I said, what New Hampshire primary established was that the fact that there was this deep division within the country that had nothing to do with me, that had to do with the following of various policies. The fact is that he did not receive 5%. I'm going to have to proceed on the basis of what he did receive.
Well, that's the criticism, Senator.
Senator, some analysts are already saying that your decision will so divide the Democratic Party, moderates and slightly to the left of middle, that it will virtually assure the nomination of President Johnson, something which one infers you manifestly oppose unless he radically changes his policies.
That's correct.
And second, that it is likely to make it easier for a Republican to win in November. How much did those considerations get cranked into your computer of decision?
Well, obviously, those were all matters that I considered very deeply. I think first we have to understand, in order to win the nomination, you're going to require, I think, 1,312 votes. If you won all of the primaries, you wouldn't come anywhere near the 1,312 votes that are required. So even if one individual went in and won all of the primaries, that in of itself is not going to win the nomination. What is involved, really, is the fact that the Democratic Party and those who are going to go to the convention accept the fact that the policies that are being followed by the United States and by the government at the present time are a mistake. I think I broaden that. I don't think that I narrow it. I think that I broaden it. I think Senator McCarthy has certain strengths. I think I add. I think I have certain strengths. And together that we add to the opposition that presently exists. It will give a opportunity for the Democratic Party to select at the convention the strongest possible candidate. So I don't, it's not just a question of winning the primaries. I don't think that in New Hampshire, the significance of New Hampshire was the fact that Senator McCarthy won 22 of the 24 delegates, or 26 delegates. The fact is of what vote he got and the opposition that was demonstrated by the people of New Hampshire to the policy that we're being followed at the present time. I think I add to that. I think I add to that by going into the primary myself.
Senator, you indicate here that you will drastically change our policy on Vietnam. In at least a general way, can you tell us what...
As you know, I've written about it and talked about it over the period of the last several years. The details of what I think are set forth in a book that I wrote, To Seek a Newer World. The details of how I think that we could arrive at a solution to the problem of Vietnam, but basically I'm in favor of de-escalating the struggle there. I'm basically in favor of the South Vietnamese taking over more of the effort and less of the effort being in the hands of the United States government and American soldiers. I'm in favor of our making it quite clear to the South Vietnamese that the corruption should end, that they have to have a general mobilization, and that they have to draft 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds. And I'm in favor of negotiating with the National Liberation Front, as I have said. And I think that we have to make it clear that the National Liberation Front is going to play a role in the future political process of South Vietnam. Yes, and I've also said in the past that I think that in order to gain, that the North Vietnamese have refused to come to the negotiating table until we have stopped the bombing. I'm in favor of taking that step. They have not requested or suggested that it be done on a permanent basis. And as I have said, if the negotiations are unsuccessful or if they use that period of time in a way that is adverse to our military forces there, then I think that we can take retaliatory action.
If you fail to win the nomination, will you support President Johnson or whoever the Democratic nominee?
I will decide that at the time of the convention. I would hope that through the debate and the discussion, that it will be clear that the policies of the United States at the moment, both in Southeast Asia, in our cities here, and in the toward the undeveloped nations of the world, as well as what needs to be done in our rural areas at home, will be changed. I will decide, however, that at the time of the convention.
Is it conceivable that you might support someone else, or even...
I won't add to my answer. I will make that decision.
Senator Kennedy,
yes.
Do you think that the gold crisis today is tied to our policy on Vietnam?
Yes, I do. I don't think that you can escape that. The fact is that we're spending $30 billion a year in Vietnam. Several billions of dollars are in the form of an outflow that cannot be stopped. If the war secondly, the gold crisis is basically a lack of confidence in the United States and the policies that are being followed by the United States at the moment. So there's no question that the gold crisis that we're facing is intimately and irrevocably tied to what is going on in South Vietnam.
Senator, will you go into Wisconsin and other states to campaign for Senator McCarthy?
Yes, I shall. Clark, Clark, and then I'll come back to you. Excuse me?
If negotiations begin, will you withdraw?
I do not plan to. I think that it's not only a question of negotiations, it's a question of what our position is at the time of negotiations. I think, as I have said before, that the message that was sent to Ho Chi Minh in February of 1967, which was the basis of our negotiations, was a mistake. So I think that it's a question of what our negotiating position is and what is being accomplished at that period of time and what the conditions and situations are in the country. I think it's also terribly important what we're doing here in the United States and what is happening in our cities, what is happening in the relationship to people, one to another, age groups, the division that exists in age groups, the division that exists in the races, and the divisions that exist on the war in Vietnam. Mr. Molinoff.
What was your response that you got back from President Johnson when you sent word to him? Was there any response?
I don't think that he indicated either pleasure or displeasure. I didn't, I'll tell you this, I did not talk to him personally. I talked to a representative of his, so I do not know what his, when he heard the information, I don't know what his personal reaction was.
Senator Kennedy, what
So,
you summarized your policy briefly on Vietnam. Could you summarize your policy briefly for the cities and for the tension that is piling up for this coming
I think
summer?
the most important thing that we need right at the moment is jobs. I think that man needs dignity and hope for the future and the possibility of raising his family properly. And I think that what we need at the moment to head off the crisis is jobs for our men in the ghettos, but also jobs for the men in the Delta, jobs for the men in eastern Kentucky, jobs for the men and the Indians that live on the reservations where the unemployment rate is 80%. I don't think it's just a question of providing jobs in the cities, because people are flowing from the rural areas of the United States into the cities because they can't find employment there. So I think they're intimately and personally connected. So I think that jobs is the most important. After that, I think problems of education. Our young men and women are not being educated properly in our schools, in the ghetto schools. Only 3 out of 10 graduate from high school. And those who graduate from high school only have a 50-50 chance of the equivalent of an 8th grade education. We have to do a great deal more about education. We have to do more about housing. But the immediate problem, the immediate task seems to me jobs. There's legislation now before the Senate of the United States. I would like to see the President of the United States support that legislation as I do. They opposed it last year. I think it would have been a very important step forward.
Senator, your indication that you'll cooperate with Senator McCarthy, does that foresee a possible pooling of strength?
I would like to take any step that is necessary to cooperate and work with Senator McCarthy.
A number of Democratic leaders have indicated they're going to remain with President Johnson. Do you have any firm delegate support as of now? And when will you begin campaigning?
I'm going to present my cause and what I believe has to be done for the country as soon as possible. I expect that there will be some Democratic leaders who will be opposed to me, as there will be some who support me. I am going to the American people and across this country and all of the states of the Union, as many as I can, to present what I think we can accomplish as far as the future, what the soul of this country is and what this country stands for. And that is what I believe that we've lost. I don't think it's a question just of policies, of what specific step you take in the cities or specific step that you might take in Vietnam. I can't, as some others have come before the American people and say, I know if I'm elected President of the United States, the war in Vietnam is going to be ended and it's going to be finished. I come before the American people and say that I think that we can do better and that I think we can make greater progress than we have in the past, and that this country stands for something special, not only for our own people, but around the rest of the world, and that we're in great danger of losing that. And I want to make an effort myself to present that. And as I say, I come in with a very difficult road ahead, all of which I recognize. I'm not asking anybody to hand anything to me. I'm not asking anybody to give anything to me. I'm going to go to the people, and I'm going to make an effort. And I think that it's worthwhile. Mr. Hurley.
Senator, how much support do you expect to get from organized labor, its leadership, and rank and file?
Well, obviously, I'm going to need some support from the members of labor organizations, or my effort will not be successful. I would hope that perhaps some of those labor leaders would support me. The indications have been, from their public pronouncements and public statements, that they are supporting President Johnson, and that I can understand. In the back.
Senator, why did you reject the alternative of putting your strength behind Senator McCarthy's drive for the
Because I think, first, I think that he has strength and I have individual strengths. I don't think that just supporting an individual delivers that. But I think, first, going across the country and that I have strengths that I can contribute in opposition to what we are doing at the moment. And secondly, which I think is terribly important, giving some alternative policies for the United States to follow as far as the future. I don't think that this is a question of just opposition. And I know that Senator McCarthy has some suggestions as to what we should do, but I also have some ideas. And I don't think that the Democratic Party or the people of the United States lose at all by considering those. And there is a greater possibility, the more people that are involved in this, there is a greater possibility of having the strongest possible candidate. We've had a good deal of feeling in the country that there is not enough discussion of issues, that there is not enough feeling that the American people or the political parties mean anything, and that they have any contact with political leaders. I think by my going into it, that I add to that, and that people can make a greater contribution and have a feeling of greater participation, and also that those who feel the same way that I feel about some of these issues can make their views known. So I think that I can contribute to that.
Senator, is there an implication in your remarks that you or Senator McCarthy would back down the California primary before a vote in order to have a united vote on the issue?
Well, I am going in, as I said, I'm going into the state of California. I would hope that we could work out, and I'm going to make the best possible effort to work it out so that we can work together out there. But I think that it's premature to judge what he would like to do or what I can do. As I say, I'm in this, and I'm in it because of the strong feeling. So I'm not, and what I think can be done. So I'm not discussing now about getting out. Go ahead. Could you say a little louder?
You found any fault with General Westmoreland's military leadership?
I'd rather not talk about it on the basis of personalities. I have some grave reservations about the policies and programs that are being followed at the moment.
Do you feel you could work toward your goals as a vice presidential candidate on a Johnson ticket?
No, and my feeling is that President Johnson wouldn't feel that he could work toward his with me. I don't like... I'm not here to speak for him, but that's what my feeling is.
Any understanding with Senator McCarthy on how you could campaign, as you put it, in harmony?
No, I told him through Senator Edward Kennedy what my feelings were, as I've said here today.
Well, how can you campaign in harmony when you're both trying for the nomination?
Because I think that it's important that he win in the primaries in Wisconsin, that it's important that he wins well in Massachusetts and Pennsylvania, because I think that furthers the cause, the basic cause in which we both believe. As to what we should accomplish for the future, I think I can also contribute to that by campaigning around the country.
Campaign for him in those 3 states?
Well, I don't think that that's what we said. I said that we're going to try to work together, and I will make every effort to work together. As I also said, I'm entering my name in the California primary.
Any agreements with Senator McCarthy?
No. I'm placed in the primary now.
Senator, will you stick it out to the end regardless of what happens in the primaries? Is there a possibility that you might withdraw?
I plan to make this effort because I believe that I can win. And I plan to make this effort because I think that the policies and programs in which I believe can bring about some differences in the United States. I go into this effort with that idea and philosophy.
Do you expect the weakest candidate to get out?
In terms of your pledge to cooperate with Senator McCarthy as you both go ahead, if you find at any stage, say after California, that in your judgment you cannot win, would you throw your support to him rather than to the president?
As I say, I'm in it to win, so I think that any of those questions are premature. I'll decide all of those matters as if a contingency arises. But that's not the contingency that I plan on.
Do you have any plans to campaign for delegates in the South?
Yes. I'll do whatever I can in the South. I don't know that the support will be overwhelming, but I plan to go. I plan to talk about these matters. I don't think that they're matters that just affect the northern states. I think that they're matters that affect the whole of the United States. I haven't decided what primaries that I will go into at the moment. I just haven't decided what I'm going to do.
Senator, to be a conflict, how can you begin to win, Senator, and encourage
The question was, how can I be in it to win and in addition to support Senator McCarthy? I think that I have something to offer to the American people. I think at the moment that it's important that the policies that we're following at the moment be reversed. I think it's important that I'm not in these primaries. I cannot go into these primaries. I think that it's important that the people speak in these states that they are opposed to the course that we're following at the moment. And so that therefore, in that, we have a common effort. I also think that from a positive point of view, in other states where there are not primaries, where the vast majority of the delegates are selected from, as well as some states in which I'm still able to go into the primaries, that I will be able to present my own candidacy and what I feel.
The primaries will be just a platform for your views.
I think they're far more important than that. I think the primaries are very important, or very significant, to give an opportunity for the people to make some judgment themselves and to have their voices heard.
But you'll be trying to get votes for yourself in Oregon.
That's right.
Senator McCarthy will be, and you'll be saying good things about him. It'll be kind of awkward for him.
Well, I would hope that it would not. As I say, I think that we broaden the base of opposition to what we have at the moment. I think one of us going into one of those states it does not have as broad a base of following as both of us going in. I think the people will look at the results and see that there was a heavy vote in opposition to the course of action that is being followed by the United States at the present time. I think that's what will be significant. That's what will be important, in addition to who wins the delegates. As I said in New Hampshire, it wasn't winning the delegates so much as the heavy vote in opposition to the course of action that is being followed in the United States, and I think that both of us can make that.
You've talked about the presidency. What concern or what consideration have you given the possibility that the divided party may lose a great many lower seats, governors, legislators?
Well, I think that what New Hampshire established, and that which was my reservation about going into New Hampshire, that this would be just the fact that I had divided the party based on personality clash, with why I was willing to get involved that at that time into New Hampshire, that it would be divided on the basis of personality clash, and that the party would be divided by me and by my effort. What has divided the party is not me and not Senator McCarthy, but the policies that are being followed by the present administration. I would hope that before this is finished and before this is completed and before the convention is over, that we can unite the party and have the strongest possible candidate, with the candidates having presented their views across this country and in primaries, that we can have the strongest possible candidate to be selected at the Democratic National Convention. Goy? The question was, if Senator McCarthy asked me to stay out of Wisconsin, would I cooperate with Senator McCarthy by staying out of Wisconsin if he asked me to? Certainly. Certainly.
Senator?
Certainly.
Senator?
One more question.
Senator, we have lost the support of our allies in Western Europe. What are you planning to do?
I would hope that the changes that I've suggested and the changes in policies in Southeast Asia, what needs to be done in order to strengthen ourselves at home, will bring back support for the United States, not only in Western Europe, but in Latin America and Africa and all across the rest of the country. I think that's been one of the great casualties of the war, not just the divisions within our own country, not only the divisions within our own country, but the lack of confidence that exists in the United States and other places around the globe. Thank you very much.
So it's a whole new ball game with Senator Kennedy's announcement. The candidate most immediately affected, Senator Eugene McCarthy, is now with David Shoemaker in the studios of WBAY-TV in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And in a moment, we'll switch out to Green Bay to hear Senator McCarthy's reaction. Obviously, from Senator Kennedy's comments this morning, he is in it to win. He keeps insisting that Senator McCarthy also is in it to win, and the question most persistently asked was, how can both of you be in it to win if you're cooperating with each other? The only conclusion that could be reached is that before the convention, one or the other of them, either Kennedy or McCarthy, after having proved himself to be the stronger, would withdraw in favor of the other, so that in the convention there would be an open convention with a solid, united block of delegates and political sentiment in order to block the nomination from going again to President Lyndon Johnson. This morning in Washington, Mr. Johnson went to a morning breakfast, and when asked about Senator Kennedy's announcement, the quotation from the president was, "Some people are speculating in gold, some people are speculating in politics." Now in Green Bay, I think we're ready with Senator McCarthy and Dave Shoemaker.
Senator McCarthy, what's your reaction as a politician? Can you take him, I guess, is the best question.
Well, I haven't really been moved to withdraw at this point. I think that I can certainly win in Wisconsin, and I see no reason to believe that I couldn't go on and win the other primaries in which I'm committed.
Does this cause you in any way to reassess your overall position?
Well, I don't think there's been any reassessment, David. I've been committed since I first announced to run in the primaries, to which I had responded, and I've made no changes in my plans, either because of New Hampshire or in consequence of the announcement of Senator Kennedy.
I keep hearing this sort of a rumbling indications or intimations of a deal at some point in the future. Are you prepared to deal with Bobby Kennedy?
I'm not really prepared to deal with anybody so far as my candidacy is concerned. I committed myself to a group of young people, and I thought rather idealistic adults in American society. I said I would be their candidate, and I intend to run as I committed myself to run. If a situation develops at a convention, of course, where I can't win, I will release my delegates. I don't have any other power over them anyway. I don't have a block of delegates whom I could trade with. If I did have, I wouldn't trade with them. So that, so far as I'm concerned, it'll be an open and free convention. I'll run as hard as I can in every primary and stand as firm as I can at the convention. And if I find that I can't win, I will say to my delegates, you're free people. Go wherever you want and make the best judgment that you can make.
Senator, what if some sort of a trend becomes apparent before then, a Kennedy trend? Would you consider negotiations?
Well, I wouldn't have anything to negotiate with. All I have to run on is my commitment, and what I thought was my integrity as I committed it to people who were prepared to raise this challenge against the Johnson administration at a time when it seemed to me a lot of other politicians were afraid to come down into the playing field. They were willing to stay up on the mountains and light signal fires and bonfires and dance in the light of the moon. But none of them came down. I'll tell you, it was a little lonely in New Hampshire. You were there. I walked alone. They weren't even coming in from outside, just throwing a message over the fence, you know.
Well, Senator Kennedy says today that he'll come into Wisconsin.
Well, I heard him say that, and we'll have to wait and see. I could have used help in New Hampshire. I kind of listened and waited. But I did it all right in New Hampshire. I think I can win in Wisconsin without help, but I'm certainly not going to turn down help from any of my colleagues in the Senate.
Senator, some pretty strong adjectives have been used about Senator Kennedy: opportunistic, ruthless. What is your own view of what he's doing here?
Well, I don't pass any judgment on his motives. He's been in a difficult position for some time with reference to the primaries and the presidency, and he had made no commitment to me to stay out of primaries or to support me or to stand by me at the convention, so that on that score, he's absolutely free to do what he's doing or anything else that he might want to do.
One of the things that he listed in his statement was the qualifications that he had that he seemed to feel would make him a good president. What do you think of his qualifications?
Well, I think that this is probably the point of difference between us. There are two things. One, that he might establish he could win more easily than I can, and the other is that he'd make a better president. After New Hampshire, I don't think the assertion, it isn't quite an assertion, it's an implication that he could win more easily than I, stands quite as firm as it did before. I've not been particularly deterred by polls in the past. If I had, I never would have run for Congress in '48. I wouldn't have run for the Senate in my state in '58, and certainly I wouldn't have gone into the New Hampshire primary if I had read the polls. I think that I have more of a problem of identification, of getting people to know me, but on the record in my own state, and I think in New Hampshire, I've established that when people do know me, know what I stand for, that I think the measure of their confidence in me will be at least equal to that which may now exist with reference to Senator Kennedy. So far as which of us would make the better president, that's rather conjectural. David, I think that I don't mean to be arrogant or unnecessarily humble, but I'd make 2 points. I think one, that I think I'm as well qualified or better qualified to run for the presidency now in this year of 1968 than President John Kennedy was qualified in 1960 when he made the bid. And I think if you take into account the matter of the knowledge one should have of government and the identification with the people of this country, and look at my record in both cases, that on that broad base, I think that even after the announcement this morning that I'm still the best potential president in the field.
Well, Senator, you're speaking in terms of relativity. Let me ask you flatly, do you think that Robert Kennedy would make a good president?
Well, I don't say he would not make a good president. I don't really know what he has had experience in the administration, as he said. I'm not sure that that is altogether a compelling argument, since at least 2 members of this administration who have had most to do, I think, with sustaining the policy in Vietnam were members of the Kennedy cabinet, the Secretary of State, and also until recently, the Secretary of Defense. I don't see the association with those 2 members of the cabinet would particularly prepare one to deal well with the problems of Vietnam.
Senator, at about 2:45 in the morning, you had a visitor, Senator Ted Kennedy. What did you two talk about?
Well, we didn't talk about anything very important. I don't think people do at 3 o'clock in the morning. It was a kind of a goodwill mission. I don't know whether it was meant to come to anything particular, but it was a courtesy call, and I appreciate very much the effort that Senator Kennedy made, Ted Kennedy, in coming out. It's a long flight from Washington in the middle of the night, and he flew back again the same night, simply to say that what was announced this morning was going to be announced, but there was no offer of any deal from him to me, and certainly no response on my part, excepting what I've said here, that I don't intend to make any deals. I don't really have the power to make any deals, but I intend to pursue the course to which I've committed myself and to stand by the people who are backing me.
Who initiated that meeting?
Well, I don't know really who initiated it. I didn't.
Senator, I notice that a leading columnist says that Senator Kennedy cares more deeply about the war than you.
Well, I don't really know. You know, in every society, it seems that you have to develop a kind of an institution for making rash judgments, whether it's the soothsayers or the oracles or the high priests. And in our society, why, this seems to have been taken over by columnists. I don't really know how any columnist knows how deeply I feel about the war. I think the record shows, however, that of the members of the Senate, that I was the first one really to risk what people refer to as a political career, whatever it may have been worth, and to lay it on the line with reference to the war in Vietnam. There were others who said, well, we'll criticize and we will pass resolutions and maybe we'll write letters to the president. We'll debate it. We're against the policy, but we're also for President Johnson. I think I was the first one who said, I'm against the policy, and because you can't change the policy unless you change the man and challenge the person, and you have to do it in a person. It had to be personified. In any case, if action reflects feeling, unless I had some secret ambitions that I haven't told about, then it seems to me that on the record it would appear that I felt either more deeply about it, or at least I sensed the problem earlier than others did.
Senator, you said, as you just repeated here, that you wanted to change the course of the war. How do you think today's development will affect policy?
Well, I don't really know. I think that you have to get a reading in terms of how the public responds, and I think we got a reading in New Hampshire, and Senator Kennedy raises the same issues. Why the response will also bear upon, at least to help to indicate what the policy of the people in this country is. I don't see what's coming up between us as a kind of football match, but rather as a kind of race, and I suppose an exhibition to let the people decide if there are differences in our policies, to decide on those differences. If there are differences in our methods which we would propose to follow, to use those as a basis for making a selection. And if there's a difference in personality or question of confidence as to which one might be better trusted to be President of the United States, these are all proper considerations, and I'm glad to test my qualifications and my record against those of Senator Kennedy. I think, as he said, this is the choice that he thinks ought to be offered to the people of the country in the primaries, and I think so too.
Senator, isn't this just going to split the Democratic Party and make Richard Nixon the next president?
Well, I don't know whether it will or not. I don't see that it's likely to split it any more than it is split. This may split a part of the party, but I think it's that part which would likely come back either for me or for Senator Kennedy at a proper time if it's possible.
Mr. McCarthy, it would seem that the whole point of this campaign is now suddenly changed. There are personalities in it that weren't in it a little while ago.
Well, I think it's always been, so far as the primary is concerned, to a large extent, it's been a question of personality anyway. You can't really separate a complicated issue like Vietnam and the complicated domestic problems, which don't lend themselves to a kind of listing of issues and say, this is what I stand for, medical care and so on down. That the choice I think the people were going to make in any case in this election of =68 was partly on policy, but more importantly on personality. And this includes the personality of President Johnson, that of Richard Nixon, of me, and at this time also of Senator Kennedy.
You noticed, I'm sure, the Kennedy family lined up behind the senator. How are you going to campaign not only against the senator, but the relatives?
Well, I don't know. I've only been using one of my children up to now, Mary, and she's been pretty effective, and I have 3 in reserve whom I haven't turned loose yet. I've got one daughter, 12, who's my secret weapon, and I'm going to bring her on at the right time. She's been thinking and not saying very much.
And just one final question. You knew and know both men. You fought them both in this state in 1960, both John Kennedy and his brother Robert, who was then his campaign manager. Some people have traced, let's say, the hostility, as much as there may be, between you two men to that point. But how would you compare the two Kennedys?
Well, I don't really want to do that. I draw any comparison between Senator Kennedy and the former president. I think my business will be in openly and honestly as I can, and with as greatest frankness, since this has been made in a way the issue, the question of which of us is better prepared to lead the Democratic Party and to lead the country, to make the comparison really between me and my record and what I can offer, and the record and the personality and whatever Senator Kennedy may offer. These are the rules that he laid down, and I think this is the way it must be in the Democratic primaries, while at the same time we make the consistent case against the Johnson policies and against the Nixon policies.
Senator McCarthy, a lot of people have expected you to fold under this.
Well, I don't know how many have. I don't think the people who know me very well expected me to fold. The Vice President, for example, has given, I'm sure, no indication publicly, and I'm quite sure he's given no indication to the President privately that once I got into this that I would fold either to White House pressures or to pressures from other candidates. David, I don't, you know, I expect I'll be discovered as we go along this campaign trail. But I have a reasonably good record of standing up to some pretty tough tests in my own political career. The image that somehow someone picked me up and took me out of the academic halls and put me in Congress, and then that a happy group of politicians decided they wanted to run me for the Senate, and they said, won't you leave your congressional seat and we will endorse you and carry you on through the election. It's not quite true. My first primary, I won by 400 votes back in '48. I think we spent $1,200 in that campaign against a candidate endorsed by what was considered to be the strongest political force in St. Paul at the time. I won the nomination in '58 for the Senate against Mrs. Anderson, who is now Assistant Ambassador to the United Nations, and she was supported by what was called the establishment in our party at the convention. I won the election against a man who had been in for 12 years, had been a governor, who was considered to be beyond any possible defeat, and really ran only because some of the other so-called leading politicians in my state were afraid to run against him. So that on the record, there's not much to indicate that I would be likely to fold, either for want of money or for want of courage.
Senator, we always conclude these things by saying thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Well, it's obvious Senator McCarthy is not reciprocating with the generosity expressed by Senator Kennedy. McCarthy a moment ago accused Robert Kennedy of dancing in the light of the moon in New Hampshire, lighting bonfires, but refusing to come in there to help him. A moment ago, we mentioned President Johnson's quick reaction this morning. We want to have Dan Rather talk from Washington about what else the president might be thinking about this new development in his party. Dan?
Bobby Kennedy must get Gene McCarthy out of the race or beat him somewhere, and we don't have to do either. That seems to be the prevailing attitude in the Johnson camp. The president and his advisors do fear a Kennedy onslaught, not so much because they're convinced that he will win the nomination. They are not yet convinced of that, but because they dread what they think an all-out Kennedy bid will do to the Democratic Party. Let's have it clearly understood that some Johnson strategists have been warning for a good deal of time, warning the president that McCarthy may beat him in Wisconsin, and some others have been warning the president that he stands to lose in the June California primary. The president, however, appears adamant about staying above any primary battles. Those closest to him don't believe he will change that plan unless McCarthy steps aside in favor of Senator Kennedy. Mr. Johnson knows he's in trouble. He joked in public about the New Hampshire primary, and today he joked in public about the Kennedy candidacy. But he's crying on the inside because he knows that the time between now and the Democrats' nominating convention will be one long night of the knives for Democrats. Mr. Johnson is convinced that his best bet is to continue paying minimum attention to primaries and political organizations, at least for the moment, maximum attention to the war, the search for peace, the economy in general, and the gold crisis in particular. It is what the president himself once described as the high road. He will try to stay on it and stay out of the primaries, all the while hoping against hope that McCarthy will not step aside for Kennedy. My colleague Eric Sevareid has been here viewing these events this morning. And Eric, what is your reaction to the Bobby Kennedy announcement?
Well, the whole thing is one of the most extraordinary political and human dramas, I think, in the history of American politics. These are two extraordinary men. They both got their Irish up now, and this is going to be a Donnybrook in the next 2 or 3 months. There isn't any question about it. With all the talk from Senator Kennedy about the harmony that he would like to work in with Senator McCarthy, that's not going to be possible. The feelings among the camps of these two people, and these are many of them very young and idealistic people, are very powerful, strong feelings. And they are thinking of this in terms of a moral issue as well as a practical issue of who gets nominated and how this party wins. The old saying, he who hesitates is lost. Well, Bobby hesitated before New Hampshire, but apparently you're not lost if you're a Kennedy. You're just mislaid, and he is going to try to recoup that. But they have both now said here, in effect, and Robert Kennedy has said very specifically that you cannot change these policies that he disagrees unless you change the men in power who are committed to them. That's a devastating line. No matter, even if Mr. Johnson is renominated, the Republicans are going to use that line over and over again all next fall, whoever their candidate is. And I don't know, this party may come apart at the seams. It's possible. They have a remarkable way of rallying at the last moment behind somebody, and maybe they still will. But I must say I haven't seen anything quite like this. It's been 84 or 5 years since the president was denied renomination by his own party. That was Chester Arthur. And it's still a long bet to bet that could happen again.
This has been a special report from CBS News.
Join us tomorrow evening for more American History TV in primetime. We'll hear from friends and former colleagues about the life and legacy of the national